All right, so this is a commentary on a paper by Alec Thompson. The title of the paper is The Nurture Assumption, the Environment's Power Over the Role of Genes. And my name is David Killoren. I teach philosophy at Coastal Carolina University. And in this commentary I'm going to try to stick to criticism because it seems to me that criticism is generally more useful than praise. But I will begin by saying that I liked the paper. I think it has many virtues. There's a lot of interesting material here. The historical stuff I found especially interesting, and there's a lot in here that I didn't know about. So I learned something from the paper, and I got something out of thinking it through. And so, I appreciate having read the paper. I think the paper is also impressive because it's written by a high school student, and I read a lot of students by college, a lot of papers by college students, and I can tell you, this is pretty good even by their standards. So you should be proud of the paper, I think. But as I say, I'm going to try to be mostly critical because that seems like the way that I can be of most use to you. I should also say to begin that I am not an expert on this set of issues. I don't work on much of anything that has to do with this nurture-nature debate. And so you should take everything I have to say with a grain of salt. I'm not coming to you as an expert or an authority on this topic, but even so, I think I've got a few things that will be useful to say. So I'll start out by talking about the thesis of the paper. I actually think that the most useful things that I have to say are about the thesis. So what's the thesis? Your thesis, as I understand it, is that nurture is more important than nature with regard to the development of personality. And you're careful to avoid the claim that nurture is more important than nature with regard to behavior. So you're just talking about personality here, not behavior. And so if that's what you're about, then of course you need to distinguish between personality and behavior, and you do so. So here's your distinction. You say that my definition of behavior is a habit that is induced from learning what is and what is not acceptable in society. And you say your definition of personality can be described as the internal thought process of an individual. So the first thing I would ask is, why are you defining behavior as a habit? It seems like there are many behaviors that are not habitual. If I'm performing a completely novel task, there's no reason to assume that I'm doing so out of habit, but it seems like that could still be a form of behavior. It seems like your definition of behavior in terms of a habit is unconventionally narrow, and actually the dictionary definition that you provide as a citation here is not narrow in this way. So I'm wondering why you want to understand behavior as a habit specifically. That's a question. I think your definition of personality could be clearer and maybe more detailed. You say that personality is an internal thought process. Well, do you want to say that every internal thought process is part of an individual's personality? Do you want to say that personality is only internal thought processes? So, for example, would a disposition count as an aspect of a person's personality? Or is it only internal thought processes? Maybe you'll say a disposition is one of several kinds of internal thought processes. I don't know, but I guess I would be interested to see a little bit more discussion of what exactly a personality is. So those are questions about your way of setting up this distinction. Your distinction between nature and nurture, I think, is fairly conventional from what I gather. You say that nature is genes and heritability, basically, and then nurture is the way the person is brought up and how the environment influences the individual and the individual's unique thought process. So this is all, I think, more or less matching up with the way these terms are used conventionally, and I have no objection there. So there's that stuff. Another question about your thesis. So you say at the end of your paper, when you are summarizing what you take yourself to have shown, you say that the size of influence of nurture is larger than that of nature. Well, what exactly does that mean? I don't know exactly what you mean when you say that the influence of nature, the influence of nurture is larger than that of nature. Obviously, the influence of nurture doesn't literally take up space, and it doesn't literally take up more space than that of the influence of nature. So this is clearly a metaphor. But what is it a metaphor for? What exactly is involved in one influence being larger than another influence? One thing that you might mean, and this is sort of something that you say a number of times throughout the paper, I think. So one possibility is that you just mean that the period of time during which nurture influences personality is larger than the period of time during which nature influences personality. So the idea here would be that a person's genes are kind of an initial condition. They begin with this as an influence, but nurture, the individual's environment, is something that's influencing them throughout the course of their life, and it's changing a lot, whereas the genes of an individual don't change much over the course of their life. And so that might be all that you mean. Now, I don't think that's all that you mean, but that's one possibility about what you mean when you say that the influence of nurture is larger. It might just be that the period of time of that influence is larger. Another possibility is that you think that more features of personality are explained by nurture than by nature. So here the idea might be that if we were to make a list of all the features of personality, then we would find that more of the items on that list are explained by nurture than by nature. So that's one thing you might mean. Another thing you might do is spell your thesis out in counterfactual terms. So you might say that small changes in an individual's nurture would result in large changes in the individual's personality, whereas small changes in an individual's nature would result in relatively smaller changes in the individual's personality. That's one thing you might mean, and that's only one of several ways of spelling this out along these kind of counterfactual lines. You've got a lot of options here in terms of what exactly you're claiming when you claim that one influence is larger than the other, and I would like to see you do more to explain exactly what you mean by this claim. And I think if you were to do that work, if you were to clarify exactly what your claim is, then that would influence the course of your argument. It would require the argument to go one way or the other depending on how you end up spelling this out. So that seems like an important way of clarifying your thesis. Couple things, another thing that I'll say about the thesis is that this is a really broad claim. I mean, ambitious. The claim that nurture is more influential across the board than nature when it comes to personality. Personality, I would guess, as I say, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by personality, but I would think that personality is a really broad category of many different traits. And if that's right, then to say that one of these factors is more important than the other with regard to all of those different traits is going to be very hard to establish. It's going to be hard to establish such a claim in the course of a short paper. I would think it would be difficult to establish such a claim in the course of a scientific career. And so you might, one way to revise the paper might be to reduce the ambitiousness of the thesis. For example, you might choose one or a couple of different features of personality and then argue that nurture is more important with regard to those. That's one option. A couple words about your argument. I think in a few places you take premises of your argument to provide stronger support for your conclusion than they in fact do provide. So here's an example. You've got a story in the paper about how a baby will recognize its father if the father is present during pregnancy, and then the baby will not recognize the father if the father is not pregnant during pregnancy. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just going to take your word for it. I did not look into this claim at all, but I believe I'm willing to grant this, and it's an interesting fact if it's true. But I'm not sure that this provides all that strong of support for your conclusion. Now, this is a case where nurture, that is the environment, is influencing the individual, and it seems like it's even a case where nurture is influencing a part of the individual's personality. We might say that part of the baby's personality includes whether or not it recognizes its father. And so this is a case where nurture is influencing the personality of the individual. But shortly after you describe all this, you say, therefore, nurture is more influential to the development of one's personality. And that's the first part of that sentence. Well, I don't think that follows at all, because personality includes many different features beyond beyond whether or not the individual recognizes its father. So I don't think that you can draw the conclusion that nurture is more influential to the development of one's personality just from this one story. This story might provide some support for your thesis, but it's not going to establish the thesis. So I think the therefore there is a little bit early. I guess I'll say another thing about how you're proceeding in the paper. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot in here that concerns historically interesting scientists. Darwin, you talk about Lamarck a little bit, you talk about Freud. There's a number of other scientists that you're interested in this paper, and that's all interesting stuff, as I said. But it's not clear to me that these guys are all that relevant to the scientific question. I think that you should decide whether you want this to be a science paper or a history of science paper. If you want it to be a science paper, then I think you should really be focusing pretty squarely on contemporary science. These scientists from the 19th century are going to be interesting for a lot of this stuff if you're interested in the history, but I'm not sure that focusing on them is going to provide you with evidence about the scientific issue. I think an awful lot has happened, obviously, since Freud and Darwin and Lamarck and all those. And so I think what you should be doing, if you want this to be a paper about the scientific question, is you should be focusing on contemporary science. By contrast, excuse me, if you want this to be a history of science paper, then I think you should probably change your thesis and make it something about the history of science rather than this scientific question about the role of genes in the role of genes and environment and development of personality. So that's what I would have to say about kind of the overall character of the paper. I think there's a kind of tension within the paper between its historical focus on the one hand and its scientific thesis on the other. I think that's about all I have to say about the paper. I want to emphasize once again that I got a lot out of thinking about the paper, and I really appreciate you having submitted it. I'll be interested to see where you go with this next. Maybe 20 years from now, we will all be reading Alec Thompson on nature and nurture and personality. And if that's the case, then I'm very pleased and honored to have been able to comment on your work at such an early stage. So thanks a lot again, and I'm going to sign off now.